Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maleary and this is X Job Downloaded, and today we're going to interview my mate Mike Neville. Now Mike is a former police officer with the Metropolitan Police and he was a groundbreaker when it came to super recognisers, but we'll come on to that later on in the interview. But Mike, thanks for coming in this morning to talk to us. Where did it all start for Mike Neville? Where were you born and how did you get to the police?
So I was born in Bolton in Lancashire, 1967. Most of my family had been soldiers, about 4 or 5 generations back. My uncle was a detective constable initially in Lancashire and then later Greater Manchester when it was all amalgamated together. So there was like police and army in my family. I went to a local grammar school, liked history and stuff like that. So I write books, so that carries on. But I wanted to join the police. There was no police cadets at the time, so my mate said, I'm joining the army, and there's the military police. So I went in the Royal Military Police. I joined at 16. Had a great time. Went out to Hong Kong adventure training from a council house in Bolton. How would you else to do that? And then served in what was then West Germany, which was really good for policing because you had all the service families as well as the attached personnel as well as soldiers. So good experience. I was like a training detective in the Special Investigation Branch, which you're also like the coroner's officer as well. So lots of dead bodies. Sadly a lot of children, a lot of cop deaths in the army, bizarrely.
Oh.
Some good investigations, and then I was in Northern Ireland, and then I rang up Manchester Police from Londonderry, and I said, "Are you recruiting?" And they said, "No." I came out to the phone box disappointed, and a friend who I'm still really good friends with now, he said, "I'm joining the Met." So I went back in the phone box, and that's that one. Your whole life sometimes pivots on a moment in time, doesn't it? And it was outside a phone box in Londonderry that's why I ended up in the Mets, and I joined in '89.
Fantastic. Well, it's interesting because the podcast that came out this week was with Dave Mangan, and he was a former military police, went into Lancashire Police, and
yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
He's a really nice guy. So what section were you with the RMP? My dad was with 19 Brigade and then it amalgamated 156 and went to Colchester. But where were you?
So I was in. So it was originally 110, and then it was 113 Provost Company out in West Germany. The initial training was in Bovington. That was army training. Military police training was in Chichester. Out to Germany, 110, 113 Provost Company. I was actually attached to a special unit for a short time, which used to chase Russian cars around.
Wow.
For any ex-soldiers on here, they'll remember the Sox miss. The Soviet mission, and the Soviets had a mission in West Germany. We had the same in East Berlin, and we would chase them around. It was like fantastic, really. And then I was in the Special Investigation Branch, which, as I said, dealt with all sorts of theft, fraud, murder, rape, some quite nasty rapes, child molesters who were, some of those were they were children of servicemen, and then. From that 7-day SIB, I went back into uniform because you could only be a sergeant. I passed the Special Investigation Branch course, and I was proud to have an A grade. Now everybody gets A these days, but there've been 7 A's in 25 years. So it was but I had an awful time. I had to go back into uniform while I waited to be promoted, and I was on uniform patrols in Londonderry and Fermanagh, and then. I had a choice then. I could either commission, I could wait and be an SIB sergeant, or join the police, which was always my real ambition. So that's why that's the point when I decided to leave the army after 5 years and join the Met.
What was it like working in Northern Ireland those days? Because you're talking about the time Andy Mudd was blown up in '89 in the UK, but it was still full on in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, so the key moments that when I was there, if you remember Michael Stone running round the cemetery throwing bombs at Gerry Adams and some IRA funeral, which was then followed by those 2 special forces guys being dragged out of the car.
Yeah.
So it was all very real. You know, there was lots of bombings. 2 of our own lads got blown up. They got blown up coming back from a nightclub. Luckily, the 2 lads who got in the back had met some girls, and they got blown up and ended up driving like a Laurel and Hardy half a car down the road.
Wow.
But it was all real. But I suppose when you're young, you're young and foolish. I'm glad I did it. It was a good experience, and I think really the police know. One of my big themes is the police are not recruiting the right people. When I joined the Met, at least half the guys on the pass-off parade had medals on their chest.
Yeah.
And I just think those people brought a lot to the police, and they've been dismissed, really, and not that skill has not been utilised. And it goes against Sir Robert Peel, who said he wanted guards, sergeants, not gentlemen. And we saw how, excellent the guards were at the Queen's funeral. And I just think we need more of that, not less in the police.
And do you think? I wonder if that's because the senior management now have never come through a military background.
Absolutely. I mean, to the point, I know that at Hendon.He, when he's commissioner, somebody suggested to him that, look, we should offer these, police courses to service personnel when they're leaving. And he said, we don't want that type of person. So it's absolutely deliberate. And if you look at the Met and you look at other forces, you can always tell by the medals because they're always wearing tunics. In the Met, when I joined, I think half the senior officers have been armed forces. I don't think there's one of them now.
No.
Out of 40.
That's a great shame, because actually that's where leadership is born. When you're standing next to your mate in a trench, and I'm interviewing some Falklands veterans who will explain even modern day trench warfare. I know we're talking 40 years ago, but when you're standing next to them, you know who you trust. And if you haven't got that at the top level, then trust becomes a massive issue. When you joined the Met, you've gone through your basic training at Hendon, which I probably, every military police person I've ever spoken to who did police basic training thought it was a joke, simply because they already knew how to ball their shoes and iron their trousers and all that malarkey. But what was that like for you at Hendon?
Well, I'll tell you what, the first night summed it up to me at Hendon, because when I joined the junior leaders at 16, we were given a photograph and you were encouraged to cross off the heads of those people who got binned. So the sergeant said, right, how many people here? 30. Right, 5 of you will get through. So immediately you up your game, don't you? And they're ruthless, the sergeants, and then, but at the end of your time, when you meet them again when you're out, you know what top blokes they were. They were absolutely dedicated people, and I've met them since. I've been higher ranked them. I have a colonel's rank now in the Army Cadets. I met my old sergeant major. He said, "Oh, one of my lads is a colonel," and you have utter respect for these people. And it was like, they're out of 35 will get through. First night at Hendon, the sergeant was weak and weedy, and he said, "How many people here? 20, 19 will get through." So straight away, a slack attitude, in my view, crept in. And there's also, you could detect a change, because there was me, a girl who'd been in the RAF, and an ex-grenadier, and we were the first time ever that the military people weren't appointed as the class captain, so that you could see the change then. 1989, and that awful attitude has crept all the way through.
Yeah, and our first chief constable was in Essex, was a military person. And that's how and in fact, when Colchester was a borough force, unless you'd been in the military, you didn't get into the police, because you had to know how to fight with the squaddies in the street. That was the bottom line. You're at Hendon, you finished your training. Where did you go to from there?
So my friend who originally encouraged me to join the Met, he was at Streatham. So I tried to get to Streatham with him, but there was no places. So I got to Clapham. Clapham was a good old police station at Union Grove. It's now a block of flats, I think. Good Victorian police station. Good area as well. It was right next to Brixton, but without the politics. So it was a good, so lots of crime, in particular, young black men, in particular, robberies. That was a big thing. White crime, vehicle thefts, burglary. A good what was not what I expected was pub fights and stuff. Having been in the military police, I never went to one of those. But there was a street robbery was the that was a key area that I found myself active in, because what happened was I'd been an Army Cadet, and I joined I became an instructor in the Army Cadets. I took over the unit that covered Brixton and Peckham, so I had good relationships with all these young kids from all sorts of backgrounds. But it particularly got me trust. And I was a home beat officer. Very soon afterwards, I was made a permanent beat officer for an area around South Lambeth Road and Clapham Road. It's a triangle which has got two very bad estates. One was particularly bad for drug dealing, but also some very rich houses where Joanna Lumley lived and things like that. So a very good area to police in. But because I ran the local Army Cadets, I had lots of trust and people would tell me what was going on. So the two things. I remember I nicked a fellow who'd been an armed robber, and his daughter had been away on the camp. And I said, "Oh, your daughter did well in the cadets at the weekend. She got a shooting badge." And he said, "Oh, it must be hereditary." So I had a good relationship with the locals. You know, one time some drug dealers tried to attack me. A lot of black guys tried to attack me, and there was a lot of Irish fellas, and I'd helped out. One of them had got a parking ticket, and I sorted it out. And they all came out of the pub with hammers, and I wasn't attacked again. No. So it was a good area to work, and also be enmeshed, because I think what's been lost in the police is they talk about community relations, and it is simply that. And the community relations means having a meeting where only people are very vocal and noisy and have got their grievances about stop and search, they come along. That's the senior officers think is community liaison. I had real community liaison in the sense I took these kids away, the roughest families trusted me, you know, and it made a difference. I understood where they were coming from. And of course, I was seen as part of the community. Now, if you look at places, and I lived in Lambeth as well at the time, if you look now at like Brixton, it's almost like an occupation force. None of the officers live there. None of them have got any currency there. You know, they come, they police, they go away. Whereas I was in a place where I lived there, you know, and I lived there and I was involved there in the community, and I just think that makes a difference. It's actions, not words.
Absolutely right. And for me, a turning point in policing history was 1994, when they did away with housing allowance and therefore police houses went. Licensing laws changed. We went from a culture where you had Sunday with your family. I've said this before on here, but where you had Sunday with your family and you had your roast dinner. Now you can drink from 8 a.m. till midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. There is no balance around life and community, and every crime, doesn't matter where it is in the world, starts in a community. Yeah. And unless you've got that community interaction, chief officers, you're not going to have community policing. You can have as many blue light runs and as many local policing teams, but unless you're working the community, you're not going to know what's happening there.
I mean, just to give you an idea, Pat, somebody stopped me from calling in to my cadet unit when I was on duty. That's how naive and stupid these senior officers are, like, you know. So, but they're all talk. Like I said, they'll tell you about diversity, they'll tell you about community relations. It's all rubbish. It's just words, and they don't play the game. And so it was good. I got good information. I mean, the consequences of all this, what happened is another big change that happened. If I can continue on the career, is all right? Continue on.
Carry on, mate. The floor is yours. So
the banks in the early 90s and the building societies, they took down their screens to be more friendly and user friendly. Okay, and this had a consequence, because the bank robbers went from being like me and you with stocking masks on, like you see in the Sweeney, middle-aged white men, to young black kids just simply no weapons, leaping the counters and stealing these steaming robberies. And the DI at the time, a guy called Ian Macdonald, I must be getting old because I spoke to his daughter who's a sergeant, and he said he handed me a book of photographs of him, because you didn't get a video in those days. You got a book of photographs. He said, "You know about these young black kids around here?" And this is the whole start of my career in images, CCTV, Super Echo. This is the critical moment when Ian Macdonald handed me that book. And what I rapidly realised was that there was no systems. If fingerprints or DNA had been found at these cases, there would have been something done. And myself and a guy called Dave Barnfather, who I'm still friends with, is Geordie lad. We were interviewing one of the lads who we caught doing one of these robberies, and we said, we're at the fingerprint desk and taking his fingerprints, and he said, "How many of these have you done?" And he said, about 70. But what, 70? How has this been missed? But the reason it's been missed is because London was then divided into about 70 divisions, and the flying squad only would deal with armed robbery. So if you rob by force of numbers, and when we looked into it, they were hitting post offices, banks, and this huge operation grew out of this. And I was showing, so at one point there was 6 juvenile informants in the Met, and I had 5 of them. And we're showing them we'll go and see them in prison, show them the photographs, get the names, arrest. It was so quick, we'd been nicking them the following day. There's no, this business of having what's the phrase that breaking the link, which I'm trying to think what it was because I was an informant handler as well.
Yeah,
there was no corridor between it. We were getting information, nicking them, and we ended up solving 132 bank and post office robberies. I was like a PC. Dave was a new a DC, and we got loads. Every time I'd read a book about Tony Lundy, and now Tony Lundy is either people say he's the most corrupt officer in the Met, he's the best officer in the Met, etc., etc. But in that book, Tony Lundy had said, offer everybody the chance to give information. And that was every time. And even and what I used to find with the old Bill, they could have fights with anybody. Me, I could fight with anybody. But when I got back to the station, I would say, look, it's ended. We're here now. You might as well be good. And I'd say, do you want some food? I don't want your food ban and all this sort of stuff. But I'd go and buy Kentucky Fried Chicken. It wasn't even Kentucky. It was like a Mississippi Fried Chicken or something. Like £1.50. And the bloke said to me, he said, you're a mug. I said, am I? I said, I made 10 grams worth of overtime out of the last bloke I bought £1.50 worth of Kentucky for, because I can talk to people. And so one case led to another case, led to another case. But what it exposed completely is that there was no systems. So officers were given images. You could say to an officer, look, I'm not dealing with this case, but that bloke in that photograph is Billy Smith. Now, if they were handed a fingerprint docket to say Billy Smith did this crime, the DI would be onto them. You've been given a fingerprint docket, what's happening? With images, it was like, have that, and no one checked. So as a young PC, I realised this, and I very quickly became a DS, and I went from training detective to temporary DI in 18 months. It's a massive jump, really.
Yeah, it is.
And then I was doing all this work, and I was informant handler, informant controller, and I made all the officers show images. So I thought, you get information about drug dealing, somebody might do it, might not. If it's a crime that's been committed and somebody says, that's Billy Smith in the picture, you've got to do something about it. But then I got DCI about 14 years in, I think, and there was no jobs, and the only job on offer was crime policy unit. Now, bearing in mind, I'd always worked on Lambeth and Southwark. I was like a DI off the bill. I actually knew where the streets were, because I'd been a PC. I wasn't imposed. I knew where things were, and I thought, I really want to go and work at the yard, and I thought, do you know what? This is the opportunity to do something about this thing I found, this image thing. And I probably got the minutes of the first meeting where I said, look, this is what we're going to look at: CCTV, how we use it, how we record it, how we action it, how we measure it. And I fell in with a DS, Steve Hubbard, again, I'm still friends with, and he'd been tasked to look at what was failing at trials. And one of the biggest things, of course, was CCTV. So me and him meshed together, and we had an idea, look, we need a specialist unit. And I went to Southwark, and the detective superintendent, there was Nick Fgrave, who, of course, retired recently. He was an assistant commissioner in the Met. And he gave me the sort of waifs and strays, I think the only one fit for duty was a 20-stone lad, I think, in the first unit we set up, this CCTV unit. But it's like the dirty dozen, and I looked after people, and if you look after people, they work well for you. And we set up this first CCTV unit, and if you remember the old Police Gazette, Southwark was where we started off, was circulating more images than any force in the country. That's how many were getting in. And then I decided that if they were being identified, how did we manage that? And I said to the girl at the time, Gemma, who I ended up getting married to, I said to her, look, what you need to do, we need to separate it. So there's a separate unit. So even though you're in the same room, pretend you're a different unit. They tell you the identification, we send it back. And that's where the Met circulation unit grew out of, where all images went into one place. And then if they're identified, you didn't tell the DC, it came in, there was all checks on the identification. Is this person, does he commit these sort of crimes? Does it, have they got form for this sort of stuff? What do they live locally? And that would be sent to the DCI on the borough responsible and monitored. So I looked at how we dealt with fingerprints and DNA and put the same management structure around that. And at the same time, I was working on a database because I found out there was images of, we were circulating images of criminals. And somebody said, I know that guy there, Billy Smith. We call up his last mugshot and we already had an image of him in the same clothes. It's just mad how bad the police, and this is still to this day, this is how poor it is. Like, it's crazy sort of stuff. And so out of that, so we had, in the end, the best thing I suppose that happened for me, tragic for Croydon, was the riots in 2011, because I exposed all CCTV failings. I was in I was on front page of the Times. I was in the BBC 9 o'clock news because I exposed all the police failings about CCTV, said how awful it was, and an utter fiasco was the phrase. And of course, senior officers, rather than deal with the problem, they try and deal with you. So they investigate your private life, they look at moving you, they even try to encourage you to get promoted. But they will, rather than deal with the, and I think it's really wicked, this. The people involved, they need to be shamed, really. But the riots came and actually was marched in front of a commander called Simon Foy. And I was brought back from an Army Cadet camp because it was in August. And he said, I'm sorry, we should have listened. And I had my skipper there as witness to all this. We should have listened. And the IT department, now I despise the IT department. And they'd done everything they could to stop this database going on because of, it's too much like hard work and stuff. And the commissioner gave one of those fewer orders, you'll put it on and you'll put it on today. So that was a consequence. And because of the right, and then what started to happen, of course, is in between all this, I had noticed that as I circulated images, say I put 100 images out, we'd get about 50% IDs. But of the 50 identifications, that didn't come from 50 officers. There was one officer, say, there's a lad called Jamie Smith, who's a PC at Southwark. Out of the 50, he would make 10.
Right.
So my question was, is Jamie Smith just busy, or is there something else about Jamie Smith? What is it with him? And I fell in with what was then Dr., now Professor Josh Davis from Greenwich. And we must have been at a conference together. Neither of us can remember exactly when we met. But I spoke to Josh and I said, look, I've got this. You're a psychologist. And he was very cynical because his PhD had been on bad identification evidence, how poor people are at recognising people. You can't trust ID parades and things like that. So he said, all right, so we got some people together and we did some tests at the sports club, the Warren Sports Club in the Met. And it was in July before the riots in the August. And he said to me, I think we're onto something here. Because and what we found out that in America, a professor at Harvard, Richard Russell, had said he was looking at people who are called prosopagnosics, and that is face blindness. So he was looking at people who are face blind. And he'd said, look, if you've got everything you do in the world, whether it's playing chess, football, mathematics, recognizing faces, any human skill is a bell curve. So the vast majority of people are average, but there's two extremes, a very small number each who are either completely rubbish, so prosopagnosic, face blind, or two left feet with football, or there is David Beckham at the other extreme, or he said if there are people who are prosopagnosics at one side, there are people who are super recognizers at the other. So that's where the phrase. So as he was doing that academic work, I was like finding these people operationally, and then I met Josh, and Josh said, and then somebody approached me from Queen Mary's University, and he said, there's this EU funding, would you join our project? So I got my boss in, a guy called Dave Way. I said, look, what we're going to do, we're going to tell this professor from St Mary's, we want this, we want that, we want the other. And the guy came in and he utterly rolled over. He gave us everything. And my wage was paid for by I'm a Brigadier, but I went on these weeks, like days away with the EU, and I saw the utter wastefulness of how much food people could eat and the disgracefulness that people didn't do any work. But me and Josh Davis did. We created all these new tests to find different tests for super recognisers. So we didn't just look at the whole ability. We looked at breaking it down into short-term memory, long-term memory, spotting faces in crowds, and image matching. So they're the key skills. But that's how the super. And as the riots occurred, what we realised is we were sending emails out. Do you know who these people are? And of course, people delete emails. So I was given another pool of officers who were not sick, lame and lazy. Most of them were just sick and couldn't work. So one guy had a heart condition, another had bad epilepsy, somebody had been badly beaten up. One guy had one hand and he'd lost it in a traffic accident, police traffic accident. And he said to me, Governor, I've had crap jobs since. He said, but working with you, I feel like I can make a difference, because what I did with them, they found super recognisers, they took the images and then they made appointments to see super recognisers, and that increased their identification rate by 50% by having this focused team going out. One of the best guys, a black guy called Idris, who got the BEM actually. Idris was, he still is, a jailer, so he's not even a police officer, but like, for example, he works in the cells at Charing Cross, 60 cells, so he sees a lot of people, a lot of thieves, burglars every day. One of what we call the area identification lads would make an appointment with Idris, see a sergeant, look, can we see him for 2 hours, sit him in a room, show him with the database, you could say, right, I want to see Westminster burglars, could break it down. And he would make 20 IDs in an hour or so. All the paperwork was done, and that made it. But then the biggest thing that changed for all the things I do was an Excel spreadsheet, because I could see each borough, I could see how many identifications had been sent and how many had been converted into a detected crime. And the assistant commissioner called me up to one of these meetings, like, at the James Bond meeting where all the 32 borough commanders are sat around the shark tank. And I could produce this spreadsheet, you see, just like we could do with fingerprints and DNA. And that was the moment that people started to take notice, because it's no career threatening. They essentially, you've got to make sure that officers. So what I've done from the very start, from getting that book of photographs from Ian Macdonald as a young PC, was to create this end-to-end system. So any image, I saw it as an assault course, like the police PC might not get the image, so it collapses then. If he gets the image, he doesn't know how to circulate it, it collapses then. If you circulate it, you get an ID, but no one does anything, it collapses then. If it gets, you send it out to a DC who then says, I don't think it's them, it collapses then. Or the CPS can't use the thing. So all these obstacles I tried to nullify. And so we have this system where you capture an image of a criminal off the camera, whatever, mobile phone, drone, and it ends up in a criminal being convicted at court. And of course, people get longer sentences, because it's one thing saying he smashed his head into the floor, but when you see it, that's really, that shows the evilness of it, really. So, but we're still in a situation now with, if you look at Essex Police when we went out there, so you're all for, with you, like, let's find all the super recognisers. Then I spoke to them afterwards, and they said, it's good, but we haven't got any images to look at, because people like the super recognisers. It's good because it's almost like the stockings and suspenders of the whole thing. That's sexy, isn't it? Having, these super cops who can do all this sort of stuff. But what you need, of course, is the boring bit of getting the images and showing to them and managing and having a management process. And then what you have, of course, is that senior officers have been dealing with the force recently. Oh, we don't need super recognisers, we're getting facial recognition. So they think, but a computer needs a human to verify it. And the computers only really work when it's really good quality face-on images, So it's a real, the two of them complement each other. They're not a competition. But it saddens me. What saddens me most of all of this is that I have knowledge. I don't want to make millions of pounds, as long as I can, feed the several children and support the several wives I've had. As long as I can do that, and I've got food on my table, I've got a wonderful skill that could solve hundreds of thousands of crimes and it's not being utilised.
No.
And it could be utilised far more. And I appeal to anybody that if you're well, I'm a businessman now, and I looked at the Met, and it costs about, if you look at the Met, if you say their product like a factory is a detected crime, if you look at what the Met budget is, and how many crimes they solve, each crime costs about £40,000 to solve, okay?
Wow.
And what I'm saying, from a business point of view, it costs me, because I have to pay for the university to do all the tests and I do all the training and stuff, it costs about £20,000 to go into a police force and find their super recognisers and train the top 20. You think, that's half a detection, and you could have 1,000 detections. So when senior police officers, is there a business case? Well, you give me a better business case than that. It's madness. But it's not only madness, it's saddening that to have something to think. It always reminds me of, I take great sympathy really for the Dam Busters, the first part of the Dam Busters film, where the Barnes Wallace is going to go, he's going around and no one believes him that he can do this, and I just think it grieves me that this thing exists. And like Josh Davis, the professor, says, why aren't police forces using this more? And there's a lot of a friend of mine is a brigadier in the regular army, and he spoke to a chief constable that formerly in Dorset and said, why aren't you using super recognisers? And this chief constable said to a brigadier, we don't do anything the Met does on principle. And you could bang your head on the table, couldn't you?
But that's ridiculous. I saw your business in action. I saw what you did in the Metropolitan Police in action, and it was amazing. You had a professional team. I assume that they're not running that anymore. There's not a super. There is.
The two of the guys were on the Novichok. That's how they found the Novichok men.
Oh right. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. We'll come. But I mean,
and Grenfell.
I watched what you guys did, and I got frustrated because my chief was ex-Met. And they were all up for it, but then they thought about the money, but they didn't equate the money with what was really going on, how much it would really cost to deliver. And it's absolutely captivating. And not only did you have regular officers in there, you had a team of willing volunteers who were skilled as super recognisers, and they were detecting crimes in their community. Yeah. It was amazing.
The volunteer unit, they came. How that came about is that because of the riots, all the police focus was on the riots, and so the images of burglaries and criminal damages and thefts was being ignored. And so I found these. I'm a volunteer because I'm an Army Cadet officer now, and so I went to the Met Volunteers, and there was a guy who's like a computer expert being used to feed the dogs. It's madness. A bloke who was a CCTV guy being used to shuffle paper. So we got them all in, and they did such a good job, and they won the volunteer award of the year. They got an award from the Home Secretary, Theresa May at the time. And I went up to Merseyside Police, and I walked through banks of empty machines, machines not being used in the CCTV. And I thought, in mine, I'd have a volunteer fighting to come on that machine.
Yeah,
So it just shows how all these little bits you can do, and I just think. It's tragic that the police forces, they'll say, we haven't got any money. In a business, you use your money smarter. You look at different ways to achieve more, but they just carry on doing the same.
Playing the same tune.
But I invented something that catches loads of crooks. Kevin Hurley, I love Kevin Hurley. He was a commander, of course, in his PCC in Surrey. Yeah. He gave me a quote. No other detective has caught more criminals with images than you. And it's nice. It's good to think that. And I had the world's first conviction from a pattern recognition. So if you look at your logo on your T-shirt.
Yep.
You can. What I did, I used that. I used the pattern recognition thing because it's used for the advertising industry. If you put Coca-Cola on the Super Bowl pitch, you want to know you're getting value for money. How many people can see it for how long? But I found a guy in the same T-shirt a year apart, so he's either got no clothes or he's a prolific burglar. And then I found his mugshot with the same T-shirt. So we know. So I then gave that image to the super recognisers who found him for 7 more burglaries in different clothes. So it's like combining AI. So we've got all these things exist. And I've been working with the University of Surrey recently, Professor Kittler, Kittler, if people want to look him up. And we put all these things together. that you could know with an image. I used to have to describe them in the drop-down menus: black trousers, blue jacket, all this sort of nonsense. Now you can say to a computer, show me a bald white man with a grey beard, and it'd find a picture of you and other people like you. You could say, you could scan your logo. Have we seen this logo before? Have we seen this face? We put all these things together in what was the film database of the Met. So there's a whole management process. You're taking it to police forces, and they're like looking at you like, why don't they want to use it?
But we used to do NIB 74Ds, which was a description. We would write the description down of every suspect when they were being processed, and we'd clip it to their fingerprints. And that's the other thing. You were talking about fingerprints earlier on. Now, rightly or wrongly, we would talk to our prisoners whilst we were taking fingerprints, and we would build that rapport, whatever you want to call it, and we would get the detections, lawfully obtained detections from them. Because now it's no disrespect, but it'll be taken by a civvy operator who will go in and they'll put them on a scanner, scan the finger, and that's it. There's no, they're taking away the personal side.
Yeah, absolutely. And because it all seems like a good idea, doesn't it? To do it electronically, to do it like this. It's like informants. Like I was one of the first dedicated controllers. I will take informants off detectives, but then suddenly there becomes no motivation to getting an informant. My view on getting informants was, you can be an investigator because you can be trained to be an investigator, in my view. Fill in this form, do this, follow this path. Being a detective is more human skills. Speaking to somebody, it's all right raiding the drugs thing and finding the big bag of heroin, but it's the skill to know how to speak to somebody who'll tell you where the big bag of heroin is. That's being a detective. And a lot of that skill, it's seen as dirty work and horrible. But I've always said, you don't find out where the guns are at the Vicar's Tea Party, do you? Let's go to the Vicar's Tea Party and speak to him. But I have to go and speak to rogues and vagabonds to find out where it is. And like I say, it's all this trust, all through this I was still, Captain Neville, Major Neville, or whoever in charge of the cadets there. So people, you've got to trust. You've got currency in that community, and then working as well. I work with a professor. Some people were saying to me, "Why are you working with this doctor?" It's almost like in the police, and you see it in Lancashire. I'm sure this is one of the problems with the bully investigation. This missing lady that. Insular, not consulting experts. And I said, well, why shouldn't I speak to him? Oh, he might find something out about us. Well, if he finds something out about us, then we'll improve that. But it's just this cynicism, insular nature, and people never wanting drama because they don't get promoted because they've done a good thing. They get promoted because they haven't caused any drama. Because I used to say, I was a DCI for half my service. If I worked for Coca-Cola and worked out a way to make 5 times more pop, for half the budget, with no proper transport allocated to me, the boss of Coca-Cola would say to those other factories, right, start doing what he's doing. Yeah. In the police, it's a case of, right, get him. He's showing us up, And a guy once said to me, if you rise above mediocrity, they'll be onto you because you're challenging them and all this sort of stuff. And it's sad. But I suppose that's everywhere in the public sector.
Well, it is. But I remember coming to one of your evenings at the Yard, and Bernard Hogan-Howe tipped up, and he waxed lyrical about the work that you were carrying out. I mean, I think you had a team of people in there, and they were given bundles of images to go through to see. I mean, and it works. Whatever anybody says, it works, and I've seen it in action. And it's interesting what you say about the there's professional jealousies. They don't want you to succeed. What they will do is they'll put on their promotion form that they dealt with you because they didn't like something that you did, and therefore but the issues around Lancashire, I agree with the expert, and I've sat back and watched it. I've dealt with high risk missing persons. I know what that looks like and what support you get. And if I wanted super recognisers, I'd get super recognisers. If I whatever I wanted, I'd get. Yeah. But the biggest problem for me, and Leveson has had a massive impact on the relationship between the police and the press, because the press, as long as they can verify a story and stand it up, they will use it. And why not work with the press and get the full facts and work with them than keep It's at loggerheads all the time for no reason.
Paul, I agree. But listen, you just mentioned then that day at the yard when everybody. So we call them super economizer days, where we get like 50 super economizers in. We'd have every image and we'd show them and get 250 IDs on a day. So fantastic. And the commissioner came down. I also had there though a journalist. Okay, and he was like going to do a good news story, and the commissioner started arguing with him, and I had the ridiculous situation of being a DCI having to say to the commissioner, Governor, please don't piss this bloke off, because he's, how mad is that? You've got to tell the commissioner to calm down. This is a bloke who's trying to help us, and you're having a row with him. And the other thing as well, when you spoke about professional jealousies, I suppose what did it for me in the police really, and like got to the point where I'd done my time. 30, they tried to do all sorts of discipline against me, which utterly failed. I've got my exemplary conduct certificate, but they started investigating my personal life, all sorts of crazy things about allegations about who my daughter was marrying. I mean, the eldest one was 15 at the time. All these crazy things, and what it was is I'd been put in the forensics department, and with 1/10 of the budget, I was solving over 1/3 of the crime. So people in fingerprints and DNA and the boss of it didn't like it, you see, because suddenly you're embarrassing people. And like I say, the police is just utterly dreadful for that. Twice, 2 or 3 times in my career, they start investigating your personal life, delving into you, and there's utter cynical bastards, really. And it's just dreadful because the losers are the public. Because I know my old unit, they're solving less than half the crimes they did when I was in. And that's loads and loads of victims who've suffered, loads and loads of prolific criminals who got away with it because of a cynical attitude and protecting people's own careers. It used to be called corruption, I think.
Yeah, and did you ever think you'd see the day where a detection rate was as low as it is now? I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable.
But not only is it low, Paul, it's the fact they don't care it's low. If it was me, I'd be ashamed. So I speak to senior officers and say, I could come in, I could give you, if I set up your systems, and I have to praise Thames Valley Police here because they're very good and forward looking. Particularly Steve Jones and Tina Wallace. I've got to praise those two. But too many police, you go in and say, look, I could get your detection rate up, particularly for burglary, because if you think of burglary, in the last 10 years, the detection rate has gone from about 10 to 5%. In the same 10 years, 40% of households have invested in Ring doorbells, home CCTV. So as the opportunities to detect have gone up, the actual detection has gone down.
Yep.
And it's all image-based. And so you say and they just don't care. Now, why? Because I spoke to a retired chief super in Hampshire, and he said, what sums up to me is this story. He spoke to the ACC and he said to her, look, I'm getting a bit worried about these hot burglaries, people breaking in when the victims are there. It's getting out of control. And he said, I'm losing sleep about it. And he said to her, Mom, what do you lose sleep about? And she said, the lack of female BAME officers. And that, to me, is the sad story of the police. Because I keep saying this, and I do Talk TV a lot, GB News and the like. Not one person has ever said to me, I didn't like the colour, sex or sexuality of the officer who helped me. What they say to me is I got a crap service. They were rude to me. They didn't gather evidence. I was battered or robbed or molested under a CCTV camera and they're telling me it's not working and all this sort of stuff. And I just think there's an obsession. The best thing the Home Secretary to do is scrap all diversity targets. Let's just recruit all the best people and then we'll get the detection rate. Focus on crime. But this image thing is that I wrote a report 15 years ago called the Untapped Well of Detections, and that is images. Because if you look at police forces, they've got fingerprint departments, they've got DNA, scientists, and they've got a national database. All these things in one. Images, though, are dealt with appallingly. If you commit a crime in Bolton and then you commit a crime in the same clothes, the same day in Blackburn, you won't be identified. Those crimes will not be linked. And that's what if people listening and they want information on this, we linked 43 thefts to the same man. That was the highest. And of course, when we interviewed him, the guy thought it was going to be 500 thefts, but the images had never been gathered in the first place. And success does breed success. So what I found in the Met is that once it started being successful, more officers got more CCTV because they could see something was done with it. People made more IDs, and because they were gripped and trained, that's important, the detective did something with it. And Super Economizer said to me, Governor, before you started all this, I'd stop making IDs because I was ringing a DC up and saying, do you know this bloke, Billy Smith? And they would do nothing with it. He said, no, you're in charge and you have a system where that, you know, it goes through a management process. They'll make IDs because they've felt something of it. And of course, what you have award ceremonies, big days at the yard, make people feel important, volunteer awards and all this sort of stuff. And I just think it's so many lots of little things made it a big thing. And I'm here to, if other police forces want to do this, they only have to contact me, and it's cheap as chips, you know, to do this. Buying a facial recognition computer costs £1 million.
Well, we're gonna circulate this through all our social media, and we'll put all your links into this. But I vividly remember coming into the office, and you were deploying a team to the O2, for instance. Yeah. So you know, people could put a pair of glasses on, or have a fake moustache, whatever. But the super recognisers would pick the suspect out. So if you had a team of Romanian dippers, pickpockets, if they had the images, they'd get picked up as they walked into the O2. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic. And of course, you worked with overseas law enforcement teams, Australia. I remember was there a murder that your guys?
Yeah, murder in Hastings, Victoria. We helped to solve by the colour of that was a colour matching exercise. Was. But we get images to match from all over the world. I mean, just to give an idea, just so people understand how super recognisers work, what we seem to think is that whilst somebody would look at you now and say, right, this white guy, he's got a bald head and spectacles and a beard. Great, grey beard. Of course, you haven't. You at one time you were you play black hair and no beard and no spectacles. Okay, and we're much better looking, like me. But so the average person looks at Paul Maleary today. Yeah, what the super recognisers seem to do is to look at the unchanging features, your eyes, your mouth, your ears, not the glasses, the beard and stuff. And one of the best super recognizer IDs I was an exercise, and we said to him, look, we showed an image taken in 1970, okay, of a man, black and white photograph. And we said, look, you can look at this for 5 minutes. You're not allowed to take a photograph. You're not allowed to leave with it. We then sent him out into Covent Garden at Christmas time. Imagine how busy that is. And 2 of the super recognisers found that man wearing a hat from an image taken.
Fantastic.
That take 50 years old, that image was, and they still found him.
Were you given the opportunity when the the most recent Lord Lucan stuff that came up, and they reckon that I don't know where he's supposed to be, but were you given the opportunity to look at the images of that? Was anybody?
Yeah, so I got my super, but I've got to be honest. See, what you did, the first thing the super recognisers do is do a holistic view, rather than looking at. They do a holistic view, and then they look at the eye. If that looks right, then they look at the eyes, the mouth, the nose. Then we don't know what all of them have a different thing that they look at. But with that, it was just obvious from the start it wasn't him, because he'd done a facial recognition machine. So the facial recognition machine had measured that the gap between his eyes was, 5.362 millimeters. Well, there must be several people in the world who have the same, and he'd obviously just found, because it was obviously not him from a holistic view, was it?
No, it's interesting.
But so the other thing as well, Paul, is that the other thing you can use them for, of course, is not just suspects, but victims. So this was particularly the case on the Hillsborough inquiry. So the super recognisers were loaned from the Met to the inquiry. They found the last 16 people in the crowd footage that they hadn't found in 25 years.
Wow.
One of the nicest things of all of that, they found an image of one of them walking up the road with a smile on his face, and that image was given to the mum. So you can find victims. For example, the Alice Gross murder, how the super recognisers helped there. It's like with major inquiries, you get loads of CCTV. If you had loads of fingerprints or loads of DNA, on a murder case, you'd employ your best sockos on that. In the police, you get loads of images. What do? You turn out who's on bail, who's unfit for duty, and you get all the wrong. I had one sergeant given to me on the fox hunting inquiry, loads of video to watch, who had sleep apnea and was colourblind. And I said, I'm sure he's good at something, but it's not this, is it? So on the Alice Gross murder, I said, let's stop the amateurish approach. And I've been in contact with the SIO since, and he said to me, can you give me 10 super recognisers? And the 10 super recognisers, what they found where he was, the resulting thing about that was they had searched the river once, but because of the super recognisers, they searched the river and found Alice under the logs, you see. So it was the super recognisers who solved that case. And then with Grenfell, the super echanizer had two roles. Firstly, he was shown all the pictures of he had all the concierge footage for 3 months, and he was shown photographs of the people who tragically jumped out and were on the floor, and he had to track them and say when they entered the building, how they got up and where they were going. But he's also the one who was the evidence for the 17 people prosecuted for fraud who claimed to live there. So he gave evidence saying, I've watched 3 months worth of footage and that person has never. So super echanizers are far better at the negative as well.
Fantastic.
Whereas a normal person will guess, they'll say that person has never been in this premises. That's how they were prosecuted.
And Alice Ross was the murderer at Boston Manor. Is that the?
Yeah, that's right. The West London. Yeah, where she was followed over the canal bridge, if you remember the video,
right.
by Zarkans, who was a Latvian, I believe.
Yeah, I remember that was tragic. And yeah, she went under the. I mean, if you look at Nick Bully, people think that a body will just float. It doesn't just float. No, it will stay under, and it goes down first, and then it comes up.
21 days. Is the day.
Yeah.
Like tragically, I've been on the news about this. Anthony Knott, the fireman, 21 days that was in Sussex.
Yeah.
He disappeared.
Yeah, and it's
terrible.
It's tragic. So you've got your own company now, as we've said, and we're going to put all that in there. But you've written 3 books.
Yeah, 3 books. So I'm a Freemason. I'm proud to be a Freemason. I know the Freemasons have their crooked side. I wrote one about the Bible and Freemason, as I alluded to at the very start. I love ancient history, and I love Bible studies. And I could take people around the British Museum and say, when this was carved, this was happening. But most people don't want that, of course. And I've written 2 books. One's called Crime and the Craft. The other's called Crafted Characters, Tales of Infamous and Famous Masons. And what people want to hear about, of course, is sex, murder, death and scandal. So in Crime and the Craft, I've got the full facts about Hendon.He. So you watch this goal thing on the TV.
Yeah.
I've actually got the minute book from the lodge when he joined. So
really?
I know exactly who was there. I've got all the facts, and it's all in my book. So, and so there's a lot of lies told, a lot of ramping up and criticism of Masons who do, and there are some foolish Masons, but a lot of good ones. And the air ambulance flying around London, we bought that, and some ladders for Grenfell Tower. So we're not bad people, but there are, like every organisation, there's a few scoundrels. But I would also say the flying squad was set up by a Mason, and most of the early forensic developments, pathology, fingerprints, testing for poisons, human blood, they're all Freemasons. So there's a lot of goody Freemasons as well, but they all feature in my books. And there's some, it was a Mason who arrested Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. So a Mason brought the Moors murders to an end. So there's lots of good stories, and there's a few scoundrels.
And where can we find your books? Are they?
They're on Amazon. They're on Amazon. Or people can contact me if they want signed. People like signed copies of gifts and things like that. Yeah, no,
so. I certainly will. I'm a Mason. I'll make no apologies for it at all. And I think that a lot is lost around what people don't know they make up, and the amount of great work that's gone on. I'm rubbish at it, to be fair, but the amount of great work that's gone on when we're going back a few years, when the tsunami hit Thailand, the first people to donate money was the British Masonic movement. Yeah. And that's lost. And yes, there's always going to be Hendon.He's in the any organisation. It doesn't matter what it is, but actually there's more good than there are bad. Yeah, but interestingly enough, I mean, there was talking about the gold, and I enjoyed it. I don't like anything that glorifies a criminal, and it has to be remembered that a police officer died at the hands of Hendon.He.
John Fordham, yes.
John Fordham, and I totally despise Hendon.He and what he did, but I did enjoy the adaptation of the program. But it did show a senior police officer sitting next to him in a lodge meeting. I don't know how true that was, whether there was anything in that, or whether people were passing information to him. But he was an affable character. He socialised with the local police as much as anything else, and he gleaned his information from fools, basically, people unwittingly from fools. And
well, as I said earlier, Paul, it's a dirty business. You don't get that information at a Vicar's Tea Party. You've got to deal with these individuals, but when you deal with them, you've got to be careful that they're trying to get information just Like that. I mean, one of the best questions I was ever asked was in Paris, and one of the French police officers said, "What could an evil super recognizer do?" You know, so because if we're going to use, the police are going to use them. Why won't villain use them?
Yeah. Well, why wouldn't you? I mean, I absolutely agree. You think, you look at the high net worth individuals that we've got walking around London. If I were criminally minded, I'd have a super recognizer who'd just stand out near their property, wherever it may be in West London. When you joined the Army Cadets, did you think for 1 minute that you were going to go on to be a colonel in the?
No. I remember once. I remember being a cadet, because I was a cadet in Bolton, and we went to camp, and a brigadier turned up, and the only other brigadier I'd ever seen was on Doctor Who.
Yeah.
So I was with the brigadier this week, and I mentioned that to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember the brigadier." Yeah, I mean, it's been what's happened. It's another life, really. So in that life, I'm good at identifying, I suppose, niches. And what happened in the cadets, they were trying to say, I was in southeast London, I was at a place in Kennington, and we're recruiting from Brixton and Peckham and stuff, and the full-time major said, "Oh, we want a music." So we sat on this little corps of drums, and I could play guitar, so I taught myself to play the flute to show the kids, "Oh, you can do this." And we're marching around, and people liked it, and I thought, there's something to be made of this. And then I was approached by a guy who's now a captain in the army, who was a corporal in the Welsh Guards band, and he said, "Oh, we've got these music camps where it's a bit of a fiasco." Because I'm not being funny. If you watch Ain't Half Hot Mum, the people are true. I deal with all those characters. The musicians don't make good soldiers. They're artists, aren't they? And so I went and organised, because I'm a better organiser than a flute player, and I rose up to. So now I'm in charge of all music in the UK and Gibraltar, and it's fantastic to see young people achieving, because you get so many bad things about young people, and you get a lot of really wonderful skill. What always strikes me is a skilled musician who can play several instruments, who's happy to sit with a kid from a council house in Bolton, or one from a council flat in Brixton, and play Three Blind Mice 50 times with that kid getting it right. And I think that's a lovely thing. And of course, for the communities, what the communities want from the cadets really is, there aren't many army bands left or reserves, so all they want from the Army Cadets is, on Remembrance Sunday, they want possibly somebody to march in front and play Great Escape and whatever else as they march to the cenotaph, but they certainly need a bugler or a piper to play Lament at the cenotaph at the appropriate time. And so it's a wonderful thing. It provides a good community spirit, and it's great fun. When we go away, of course, we have the best mess, because we have music every night, so yeah, lovely.
Do you still play the flute?
Oh yeah, I play the guitar more, actually. We have a rock band as well, because of course people can play all these wonderful instruments for an army band. They also have rock bands, and the army has rock bands, because of course if you go and entertain the troops in Afghanistan, they didn't want to hear British Grenadiers, they want to hear an Adele song, or whatever, the latest Top of the Pop sort of thing.
Absolutely.
So I do that, yeah. So
that's brilliant. And what does the future look like for Mike Neville?
Well, I might be getting married again, so I'm a romantic fool. If not, I'm good with images, but not good with women, I suppose. so I've got to face facts. I'm lucky to get around. It's wonderful to have something that you can give to the world. So there's a super recognizer unit in Queensland, there's super recognizer units all over Germany, because I went over and I helped them after the sex attacks in Cologne. I've got a document today in Spanish where Senior Neville says this, and it's lovely to have invented something that could do the world good. And when I say my prayers, I say, "Lord, please, you've given me all this knowledge, please let me use it to make the world a better place." As I say, I'm not interested in money. As long as I've got money to support the people I look after, then this skill, it really would make a difference. With my life with music, I think you can only be the position for 5 years in the cadets, so I'll find a new role. I used to do a lot of outreach with young offenders and stuff. That's really lovely, working with kids who've got, you find the ones with the most convictions are the best leaders, if you give them in the right direction. With masonry, I'll go around the world giving talks, making people laugh, and I've raised about 100 grand for charity through the talk, so that's a good thing, really. And I meet lots of fun and nice people. I give people walks around London, crime walks and Masonic walks. So if people want to see famous crime scenes. So I've got high blood pressure and stuff like that. All my family die about 75, so I've got about 20 years left. So I suppose I'll make the most of it and have a good time, really.
Well, Michael, I've really enjoyed today. I hope you have.
Yeah.
And without, it's fascinating. And to have worked with you previously, I can share your frustrations if your former force aren't adopting it with open arms, because I certainly know that Hogan Howe loved it. And we're talking 10 years or thereabouts, and it's just ridiculous that we're in a situation that we're talking about something that should be implemented in every single force. They've got a team for everything else. They need to have this. But without further ado, is there anything you'd like to add, alter, or correct in what you've said?
No,
today?
It's great. It's great to see you, and I hope we can have a drink together. And I just offer my services. Please use my skills, and I can help your police forces up the detection rate and really help victims of crime.
That's brilliant. And that includes private industry, doesn't it? If they've got
Absolutely.
CCTV system and they've got issues, you can help work
Absolutely.
that out. Thanks so much, Mike. Cheers.